Power is often a blinder, preventing men like Richard Dalton from seeing the cliff edge until they have already stepped off. When Richard threw his wife, Catherine, out of the $15 million Montecito estate he had built with his own construction empire, he thought he had won. He had the prenup, the high-powered lawyers, and the younger mistress waiting in the wings. He thought ownership was defined by the bricks, the marble, and the gold fixtures he paid for. He was wrong. In the world of real estate law, the dirt is worth more than the diamond. Richard was about to learn a brutal lesson in property rights: never evict the landlord. The rain in Montecito doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the mud slicker. Richard Dalton stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master study, a glass of 25-year-old Macallan Scotch resting in his hand. At 52, Richard was a specimen of modern American success. He was the CEO of Dalton and Grave Infrastructure, a man who had paved half the highways in Southern California. He was tanned, fit, and possessed the kind of jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of the very granite he imported for his kitchen counters. He looked out at the sprawling grounds of the Oakmont estate. It was his masterpiece. 12,000 square feet of Tuscan-inspired architecture, a 6-car garage, an infinity pool that seemed to drop off into the Pacific Ocean miles away, and a vineyard that produced a mediocre Pinot Noir he bottled and gave to clients as Christmas gifts. He took a sip of the scotch. It tasted like victory. Tonight was the night. He had been planning this for 6 months, ever since he met Jessica Tierney, a 26-year-old interior designer he'd hired to redo the guest wing. Jessica was everything his wife, Catherine, was not: loud, vibrant, demanding, and visibly impressed by his money. Catherine. Richard frowned at his reflection in the glass. Catherine Pembroke, or Catherine Dalton, as she had been for 20 years, was a ghost in her own house. She was 48, quiet, frumpy, and seemingly content to tend to her rose garden and volunteer at the Santa Barbara Library. She wore cardigans, not couture. When they attended galas, she faded into the wallpaper while Richard held court. He had married her when he was just starting out as a contractor. She had been a clerk at a city archives office. She was sweet, supportive, and boring. Richard had outgrown her tax bracket and her personality a decade ago. The heavy oak doors behind him creaked open. "Richard, you asked to see me." He didn't turn around immediately. He wanted her to feel the weight of the room. This study alone cost more than the house she grew up in. "Sit down, Kate," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. He turned. Catherine stood there, hands clasped. In front of her, she was wearing a beige knit sweater and jeans. She looked tired. She always looked tired these days. She sat on the edge of the oversized leather Chesterfield chair, looking like a child visiting the principal. Richard walked to his desk, a massive slab of reclaimed walnut, and picked up a blue folder. He tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. The sound it made was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Divorce papers, Kate. And an eviction notice," she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just stared at the folder. The lack of reaction irritated him. He wanted tears, he wanted begging. It would validate his power. "I'm filing for irreconcilable differences," Richard said, moving to pour himself another drink, feigning casualty. "But let's be honest. We haven't been a couple for years. I need someone who matches my trajectory." "Jessica and I," Jessica, Catherine said. It wasn't a question. "The decorator, she's more than a decorator," Richard snapped. "She understands me. She understands the life I've built. And frankly, Kate, you don't fit in this house anymore. You barely leave the garden." Catherine reached out and touched the blue folder. Her fingers were trembling slightly, but her face remained impassive. "You're kicking me out. Tonight, the eviction notice gives you 30 days, technically," Richard sneered, leaning against his desk. "But I think it's best if you leave tonight. I've booked you a suite at the Best Western in Golter for a week. After that, you're on your own. The prenup we signed 20 years ago is ironclad, Kate. You get the Honda, your personal effects, and a payout of $50,000. No alimony." He waited for the explosion. He had his lawyer, Arthur Pendleton of Pendleton, Weiss and Associates, draft the paperwork specifically to be as brutal as possible to encourage a quick settlement. Catherine looked up. Her eyes were a muddy hazel, usually warm, but tonight they looked flat. "Richard, are you sure you want to do this? The prenup. Are you sure you've read everything?" Richard laughed. It was a barking, cruel sound. "I don't read contracts, Kate. I pay Arthur $500 an hour to write them. This house, I built it. Every beam, every brick. It's titled to Dalton Holdings. You have no claim here." "You have nothing." Catherine stood up slowly. She looked around the room, her eyes tracing the crown molding, the built-in bookshelves, the custom limestone fireplace. "I built a life here, Richard," she said softly. "I planted every tree on this property. Labor doesn't equal equity," Richard said coldly. "Pack a bag. Jessica is moving in tomorrow morning. I don't want you here when she arrives." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. A strange expression crossed her face, not sadness, not anger. It looked almost like pity. "Okay," she said. Richard blinked. "Okay, I'll leave. But Richard, when the rain stops, check the foundation. You always said you cut corners on the drainage to save money. Get out," he hissed. She turned and walked out of the study. Richard exhaled, a long breath of relief. It was done. He had expected a war, but she had folded like a cheap lawn chair. He walked back to the window. Down below, in the circular driveway, he saw her old Honda Odyssey pull up. She loaded 2 suitcases into the trunk in the pouring rain. She didn't look back at the mansion. She got in, the taillights flared red, and she drove away into the darkness. Richard pulled his phone out and dialed Jessica. "It's done, babe," he said, grinning. She's gone. The castle is ours. He didn't know it yet, but he hadn't just kicked his wife out. He had just declared war on the only person who actually understood the battlefield. The first month of freedom was exactly how Richard had imagined it. Jessica moved in with the subtlety of a hurricane. The beige and cream tones Catherine had preferred were replaced with stark whites, modern art that looked like blood splatters, and mirrored furniture. The quiet rose garden was dug up to make room for a meditation pavilion that Jessica insisted was necessary for her chakra alignment. Richard threw money at everything. He felt invigorated. He bought a new Porsche 911 GT3. He took Jessica to Cabo. He ignored the few emails he received from Catherine Pembroke's legal representation, a small firm called Holloway & Sons based in downtown Santa Barbara. Holloway & Sons, Richard had laughed, tossing the letter onto his desk during a meeting with his CFO, Greg. Sounds like a funeral home. They probably handle slip and falls. You should probably have Arthur look at it, Rick, Greg warned, looking nervously at the quarterly budget reports. The renovation costs on the house are eating into the company's liquidity. Jessica ordered Italian marble for the garage. It's an investment, Greg. Richard slammed his hand on the table. The Oakmont estate is valued at $15 million. Once we finish these upgrades, it'll be 20. It's my primary asset. Technically, Greg adjusted his glasses, it's the company's asset. And the company is leveraged. Just pay the bills, Richard dismissed him. The trouble started on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after Catherine left. Richard was on a job site in Ventura when his phone rang. It was Jessica. She was screaming, "Rick, you have to come home. There are people here." "What people?" "The pool guys, no. Men in suits. And police. They're putting up a fence." Richard's blood ran cold. "A fence? Where?" "Across the driveway. They're blocking the gate. They said we're trespassing." Richard tore out of the construction site, his truck kicking up dust. He drove 90 miles per hour down the 101 South, weaving through traffic. Trespassing. It was his house. He had the deed. He had the mortgage. When he screeched up the winding road of the private drive that led to the Oakmont estate, he slammed on his brakes. There was a chain-link fence being erected right across the main entrance pillars. 2 private security guards stood with arms crossed. A Santa Barbara County Sheriff's cruiser was parked to the side, lights flashing. Richard jumped out of his truck, his face purple with rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he bellowed, storming toward the deputies. "I own this property. Get this fence down immediately." A man in a sharp gray suit stepped forward from behind the security guards. He wasn't a cop. He held a clipboard. "Mr. Dalton," the man asked calmly. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Thorne. I represent the property owner." "I am the property owner, you idiot," Richard shouted, pointing a finger at the mansion looming on the hill behind the fence. Jessica was standing on the balcony, looking terrified. "I built that house. I have the deed," Elias Thorne smiled. It was a shark smile. Tight, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. You have the deed to the structure, Mr. Dalton, Thorne corrected gently. Specifically, the improvements designated as 4450 Oakmont Drive. However, you do not hold the title to the land. Richard froze. What, the land? Thorne repeated. Parcel number 745022. It is held by a separate entity. You, or rather, Dalton Holdings, have been operating on a 9-to-9-year ground lease. That's impossible, Richard stammered. I bought this land 20 years ago from... He stopped. He tried to remember. 20 years ago. He was young, ambitious, and broke. Catherine had said her family could help. She said her grandfather had some connections in real estate. She had handled the acquisition. Richard had just been happy to start building. He had signed a mountain of paperwork without reading it, just eager to break ground. The ground lease, Thorne continued, flipping a page on his clipboard, was a revocable agreement contingent on certain moral clauses and maintenance of the marital stability of the leaseholder's primary beneficiary. Who owns the land? Richard whispered. The dread was pooling in his stomach like lead. Thorne pulled a document from the clipboard and turned it around so Richard could see the header. The SULLIVNPMBOKE Land Preservation Trust, Sullivan. Richard muttered. That was Catherine's grandmother's name. Correct, Thorne said. The land has been in the Sullivan family since 1920. When you married Catherine, the trust granted a gratuitous ground lease to allow you to build your home. However, per the terms of the trust, specifically Section 4, Paragraph B, the lease is automatically terminated upon the filing of divorce proceedings initiated by the lessee against the beneficiary, Catherine Pembroke. Richard stared at the man. The world was tilting on its axis. So, Thorne snapped the clipboard shut. As of your filing for divorce 6 weeks ago, the lease is void. You are currently trespassing on private land. The structure you built, the house, is now considered an unauthorized improvement on trust land. We are exercising our right to seize the improvements to cover the cost of restoring the land to its original state. You're stealing my house, Richard screamed. No, Mr. Dalton. We are reclaiming our dirt. The house just happens to be sitting on it. Where is she? Richard looked around wildly. Where is Catherine? Ms. Pembroke is currently in Europe, Thorne said dismissively. But she gave strict instructions regarding the unauthorized occupants. You and Ms. Tierney have 2 hours to vacate the premises before we have the sheriff execute a criminal trespass arrest. I'm not leaving. I have rights. I'll call my lawyer. Please do, Thorne said, stepping back as the construction crew began locking the chain-link gate. Call Arthur Pendleton. Ask him if he ever checked the grant deed versus the ground lease. I imagine he'll be quite embarrassed. Richard scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking so hard he dropped it in the dirt. He picked it up, dusting it off frantically. He dialed Arthur. Arthur, you need to get down here. Catherine, the land. She says she owns the land. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, painful silence. Arthur, Rick, Arthur's voice was tight. I'm looking at the file right now. I just pulled the county records because you sounded panicked. Rick, did you never ask where the down payment for the lot came from 20 years ago? No. She handled it. She said it was a wedding gift. It was, Arthur sighed. But not to you. Rick, the land is titled to an irrevocable trust. You built a $15 million mansion on land you don't own. And the lease. My God, Rick. The lease says if you commit adultery or file for divorce, the land lease reverts instantly. Fix it, Richard screamed. I can't fix this, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. This isn't a loophole. This is a trap. And you walked right into it. Richard looked up at the balcony. Jessica was crying, holding a Louis Vuitton bag. The security guards were waving her down. The rain started to fall again, a light drizzle that slicked the asphalt. Richard Dalton, the man who paved California, stood in the mud, realizing for the first time that the ground beneath his feet had never been his to stand on. But the nightmare was just beginning. Because Catherine Pembroke wasn't just taking the house. She was coming for the company that built it. The Four Seasons Biltmore is a nice hotel, but it isn't home. For Richard Dalton, waking up in a suite that cost $2,000 a night was a reminder not of his wealth, but of his exile. It had been 3 days since the incident at the gate. 3 days of living out of a suitcase, while his lawyers scrambled to file emergency injunctions that were summarily denied by judges who seemed to know the name Sullivan Pembroke better than they knew the Constitution. Jessica was in the bathroom, applying makeup with the ferocity of a warrior painting on war paint. She hadn't spoken to him much since they were escorted off the property by the sheriff. The silence was loud. I need the credit card, Rick, she said, emerging in a white silk robe. For what? Richard grunted, buttoning his shirt. He looked tired. The bags under his eyes were heavy. For a hotel, she said flatly. I'm going to stay with my sister in LA until you sort this mess out. This suite is cramped, and frankly, you're not fun to be around right now. You're leaving, Richard stared at her. I'm in the middle of a war, and you're bailing. I signed up for the mansion, Rick, she said, her voice ice cold. I didn't sign up for the Best Western or a court battle with your ex-wife, who apparently owns half of Santa Barbara. Call me when you get the keys back. She grabbed her bag and walked out. Richard didn't stop her. He didn't have the energy. He drove his truck to the headquarters of Dalton and Grave Infrastructure. The office was a glass and steel monolith near the airport. It was the one place he felt safe. Here he was the king. Here he built things that stayed built. But as soon as he walked through the double doors, he knew something was wrong. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who usually greeted him with a bright smile and a fresh coffee, wouldn't meet his eyes. She was typing furiously. Good morning, Sarah, Richard said, forcing a confident boom into his voice. Mr. Dalton, she whispered, keeping her head down. Mr. Gregson is waiting for you in the boardroom. He said it's urgent, Greg. His CFO. Greg never called meetings. Greg was a glorified accountant who lived in spreadsheets. Richard stormed down the hallway, throwing open the doors to the boardroom. Greg was there, pacing. Sitting at the long mahogany table were three men Richard didn't recognize. They wore suits that cost more than Richard's truck. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "Who are these people, Rick?" Greg said, his face pale and sweating. "These gentlemen are from Vanguard Capital. Our primary lenders." "So," Richard scoffed, throwing his briefcase on the table. "I pay the interest on the equipment loans every month." "We're good," one of the men, a silver-haired shark named Sterling, no relation to the forbidden list, just a descriptive term for his demeanor, stood up. "Mr. Dalton," the man said smoothly, "we are here regarding the demand for immediate repayment of the revolving credit facility. The outstanding balance is $12 million. Richard laughed. "Immediate repayment. The term is 5 years. We're in year 2. "Sit down, the term was 5 years, Sterling corrected. "However, the loan was secured by a personal guarantee backed by your primary asset. Specifically, the residential estate at 4450 Oakmont Drive. The appraisal value of $15 million allowed us to extend you the credit." Richard felt the room spin. "The house." "We received a notification from the Sullivan Pembroke Trust yesterday," Sterling continued, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "They informed us that your interest in the property has been terminated due to a breach of the ground lease. You no longer hold title to the improvements. Therefore, the collateral for your business loan has evaporated. That house is still there." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "It's made of stone and steel. It's worth $15 million, not to us," Sterling said. "To us, it is a structure on land you do not own, involved in active litigation. It is a distressed asset with zero liquidity. According to Clause 14 of your loan agreement, if the value of the collateral drops below 50% of the loan amount, the bank has the right to demand full repayment immediately. We are exercising that right. I don't have $12 million liquid," Richard shouted. "It's tied up in equipment. In payroll. In the highway project. Then we will have to seize the equipment," Sterling said simply. "We have trucks on their way to your job sites as we speak to secure our assets. You can't do that. I have a contract with the state. If I stop work, I get fined $50,000 a day. That is not our concern, Mr. Dalton. You have 24 hours to wire the funds, or we begin liquidation." The bankers stood up and filed out of the room, leaving Richard standing in the silence of his own boardroom. Greg slumped into a chair. "Rick, what did you do?" "How did you lose the house?" "I didn't lose it," Richard roared. "She stole it." "Catherine." "She set me up." He pulled out his phone. He needed to call her. He hadn't spoken to her since that night in the study. He dialed her old numbers. It went straight to voicemail. "You have reached Catherine." If this is about the garden club, leave a message. If this is Richard, please contact my attorney, Mr. Thorne. Richard threw the phone against the wall. It shattered. He looked at Greg. Get Arthur on the phone. Now, Arthur resigned this morning, Rick, Greg said softly. What? He sent a courier. He said he has a conflict of interest. Apparently, his firm does work for the Sullivan Trust on the side. Hey, can't represent you against them. Richard sank into a chair. He was alone. His wife was gone. His mistress was gone. His lawyer was gone. And now his company was being dismantled piece by piece. Who is she? Richard whispered, staring at the polished wood of the table. I was married to her for 20 years. She made pot roast. She knitted blankets. Who the hell is she? Greg looked at him with a mix of pity and fear. I think Rick. I think she was the one holding the ladder while you climbed. And you just kicked her in the face. The conference room at Holloway & Sons was not impressive. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was a far cry from the marble-clad offices Richard was used to. But this was where the slaughter was to take place. It had been 2 weeks since the bank froze his accounts. Richard had managed to stall the equipment seizure by filing for emergency Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the company, a move that humiliated him but bought him time. He had hired a new lawyer, a strip-mall pitbull named Saul Berkowitz, who wore ill-fitting suits but had a reputation for fighting dirty. Richard sat at the table, his cheap suit feeling itchy. He had lost 10 pounds. He hadn't slept in days. Across from him sat Elias Thorne, the man from the gate. And next to him, Catherine. She didn't look like the woman he had kicked out. The frumpy cardigans were gone. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer, white silk blouse, and pearl earrings that looked real. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was cut into a sharp, chic bob. She looked younger. She looked powerful. She didn't look at him. She was reading a document, highlighting passages with a yellow marker. Let's begin, Elias Thorne said, turning on a video camera. Deposition of Richard Dalton. Case number 45,992. Dalton versus Sullivan Pembroke Trust. Saul Berkowitz leaned forward. Let's cut the crap, Thorne. My client built that house. He put $15 million of his own money into it. You can't just use a technicality in a ground lease to steal his equity. That's unjust enrichment. Unjust enrichment, Thorne smiled. Mr. Berkowitz, are you familiar with the concept of waste in property law? Excuse me, waste, Thorne repeated. Your client, Mr. Dalton, drastically altered the landscape of the property. He cut down 300-year-old oak trees protected by the trust. He graded the soil, destroying the natural drainage tables. He installed a swimming pool that leaks chlorinated water into the groundwater supply. Thorne slid a binder across the table. We aren't just evicting him. We are countersuing for damages. The cost to remove the monstrosity he built, that is, the house, and restore the land to its natural state is estimated at $6 million. We earn. Seeking that amount from Mr. Dalton personally, Richard's jaw dropped. Are you? You want me to pay you to tear down my own house? Catherine finally looked up. Her eyes were clear and calm. It's not your house, Richard, she said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremor it used to have. It's an unauthorized improvement on my land. I signed the permits, Richard shouted. You signed them too. I signed permits for a family home, Catherine said. Not a bachelor pad for you and your mistress. Do you remember the lease terms, Richard? Specifically Clause 9, I didn't read the damn lease. Clause 9, Catherine recited from memory. The lessee agrees that the property is to be used solely for the cohabitation of the Sullivan-Pembroke beneficiary and her lawful spouse. Any introduction of a third party for romantic cohabitation constitutes a moral hazard and immediately voids the lease, reverting all improvements to the grantor as penalty. She slid a stack of photos across the table. Richard looked down. They were photos of him and Jessica. In the pool. On the balcony. In the master bedroom. How? Richard stammered. These were taken inside the house. I installed the security system, Richard, Catherine said. You never changed the admin password. It's still password 123. I've been watching you parade her around my grandmother's land for 6 weeks. Richard felt sick. She had been watching. You trapped me, he whispered. You let me build it. You let me spend every dime I had. You waited. I didn't wait, Richard, Catherine said, leaning forward. I trusted you. I gave you the land to build our dream. You turned it into a monument to your ego. And when you decided to throw me away like garbage, did you really think I would let you keep the gift I gave you? I built that company. Richard slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain control. I am Dalton Infrastructure. You can't take that. Catherine looked at Elias Thorne. Thorne pulled out another document. Actually, Thorne said, about the company. Mr. Dalton, when you started the company 20 years ago, you needed a surety bond to get your first state contract. Do you remember who put up the collateral for that bond? Richard froze. He vaguely remembered. He needed $500,000 in assets to get the bond. He didn't have it. Catherine had said she handled it. The Sullivan Trust, Thorne said. The trust put up the collateral. In exchange, the trust received a silent partner interest in Dalton Infrastructure. 51% of the voting stock to be held in abeyance until such time as the primary operator, you, acted against the interests of the trust. No, Richard gasped. No, that's not true. I own 100%. You own 100% of the common stock, Thorne corrected. The trust owns the preferred voting shares. We triggered the activation clause this morning when you filed for bankruptcy without consulting the majority shareholder. Saul Berkowitz looked at Richard. Is this true? Did you sign a surety agreement with her trust? I signed a lot of things, Richard screamed. She was my wife. I trusted her, and I trusted you, Catherine said softly. I trusted you to love me. I trusted you to grow old with me. Instead, you bought a Porsche and found a girl younger than our daughter would have been. The mention of the daughter hung in the air. They had lost a child years ago. A miscarriage. It was the crack in the foundation that they had never fixed. Richard had buried himself in work. Catherine had buried herself in the garden. So what do you want? Richard asked, his voice breaking. You want to ruin me. Is that it? You want me on the street? Catherine stood up. She walked over to the window and looked out at the rainy street. I don't want to ruin you, Richard, she said. I just want what's mine. The land. The history. The dignity. She turned back to him. Here is the settlement offer, she said. You sign over your common stock in the company to the trust. You vacate the premises of the Oakmont estate immediately. Well, you already have. You agree to the annulment of our marriage, not divorce, acknowledging that the marriage was based on fraudulent financial pretenses on your part. And if I do, Richard asked. What do I get? You get to walk away, Catherine said. We drop the suit for the $6 million in damages. We pay off the bank loan so you don't go to prison for fraud. And I will give you the check for $50,000. The same amount you offered me. Richard stared at her. It was a complete capitulation. He would leave with nothing but his clothes and the same pittance he had tried to give her. I can't do that, Richard said. I'm a CEO. I'm a builder, not anymore, Catherine said coldly. Right now, you're just a trespasser, she signaled Thorne. They began packing up their files. We'll see you in court, Richard, Catherine said as she walked to the door. Bring an umbrella. It's going to rain. As the door clicked shut, Saul Berkowitz threw his pen down. You're screwed, Dalton, Saul said. She has you on the land, the house, the loan, and the company. She owns the dirt, the bricks, and the money. You don't have a case. You have a eulogy. Richard sat alone in the conference room. He thought about the $50,000. He thought about Jessica, who wouldn't answer his calls. He thought about the house on the hill, the one he had built to prove he was a king. He realized now that he had never been the king. He had been the jester, dancing in a court owned by a queen who had stayed silent for 20 years, waiting for him to make a mistake. And he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Richard Dalton sat in his rented Ford Taurus, a far cry from the Porsche 911 he had surrendered to the leasing company 3 days prior, parked across the street from the Dalton and Grave headquarters. It was raining again. The weather seemed to be conspiring with his life to keep him perpetually damp and miserable. He watched as a crew of workmen removed the large brass letters from the granite sign out front. They were prying off the D and the A. Dalton was being erased. Desperation is a strange fuel. It burns hot, but it burns dirty. Richard wasn't ready to fold. He had one card left to play, or so he thought. He knew where the company's shadow ledger was kept. It was a digital file, encrypted on a server in the Caymans, containing details of off-the-books payments to city inspectors to expedite permits. If he couldn't have his company, he would burn it to the ground. He would leak the files. He would take Catherine down with the ship. He picked up his burner phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It belonged to a man named Reynolds, a corporate fixer who specialized in digital extraction. "Reynolds," Richard said, his voice raspy. "I need you to access the Cayman server. The Bluebird file. I want it sent to the Santa Barbara Independent and the LA Times." "Mr. Dalton," Reynolds' voice was smooth, detached. "I'm afraid I can't do that. I'll pay you double. I have cash stashed. It's not about the money, Richard." The access codes were changed this morning. By the new IT director, who? "We don't have a new IT director, you do. His name is Thorne. Elias Thorne. And Richard. He sent me a message to give to you if you called. He said the trust anticipates the scorched earth strategy." "Check your glove compartment," Richard froze. He looked at the glove box of the rental car. He reached over and popped it open. Inside, resting on top of the manual, was a white envelope. His heart hammered against his ribs. How did they get in here? He grabbed the envelope and tore it open. It was a single photograph. It showed Richard standing on a job site 5 years ago, handing a thick envelope of cash to a building safety inspector. It was a clear, high-definition shot. On the back, in elegant cursive handwriting, was a note: "We have the originals. We also have the audio recordings. If you attempt to leak the Cayman files, we will release this to the district attorney. You are looking at 5 years in federal prison for bribery. Go home, Richard." "The war is over." Richard dropped the photo. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. They were 10 steps ahead. Catherine, quiet, gardening Catherine, had documented everything. She hadn't just been his wife. She had been his silent compliance officer, gathering ammunition for a war he didn't even know he was fighting. He started the car, but he didn't go to his hotel. He drove to the one place he was forbidden to go. He drove to Oakmont Drive. The gate was still locked. The chain-link fence was still there. But the house was dark. It looked like a mausoleum. He climbed the fence. He tore his suit pants, but he didn't care. He scrambled up the muddy driveway, the rain soaking him to the bone. He reached the front door. He still had his key. He jammed it into the lock. It didn't turn. The locks had been changed. He walked around to the back, to the sliding glass doors near the pool. He picked up a heavy stone decorative planter, one Jessica had bought, and prepared to smash the glass. He wanted to get inside. He wanted to sit in his chair. He wanted to feel like a man again. "I wouldn't do that, Richard." The voice came from the shadows of the pool house. Richard spun around, dropping the stone. It cracked on the patio pavers. Catherine stepped out. She was holding a large black umbrella. She was flanked by two large men, private security. "You changed the locks," Richard panted, wiping rain from his eyes. "I changed the ownership," Catherine said calmly. "You are trespassing, Richard." "Again, I built this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I poured the foundation. I chose the wood. This is me." "No, Richard," Catherine said, stepping closer. The security guards tensed, but she held up a hand. "This isn't you. This is what you thought you needed to be to matter. You thought if you built a castle, you'd be a king. But you forgot that a king protects his kingdom. You didn't protect us. You sold us out for a younger model and a faster car." "I'm sorry," he whispered, sinking to his knees on the wet pavement. "Kate, I'm sorry. I lost the company. I lost the money. I have nothing. Please. Just help me." It was the first time in 20 years he had asked her for help without demanding it. Catherine looked down at him. The rain drummed against her umbrella. Her face softened just a fraction. "I can't help you, Richard. You have to help yourself. You have to learn what it's like to live in the world without a safety net. Without my family's money backing your bonds. Without my patience covering your mistakes." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card. She dropped it on the ground in front of him. "This is the number for a lawyer. A public defender. He's good. He can help you with the bankruptcy proceedings so you don't go to jail for the debts you owe the bank. But the company is gone. The house is gone. And we are gone. Where will you go?" he asked, looking up at her. "I'm staying right here," she said, looking up at the massive house. "But I'm making some changes." "Significant ones, Jessica?" he asked weakly. Catherine laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Jessica sent her lawyer to sue you for emotional distress yesterday. She claims you misled her about your financial status. She wants a settlement." Richard put his head in his hands and laughed. It was a manic, broken laugh. "Of course she did." "Goodbye, Richard," Catherine said. She turned and walked back toward the pool house. "Escort him to the gate," she told the guards. As Richard was hauled to his feet by the security team, he looked back one last time. The house loomed over him, a dark, silent beast. He realized then that the house had never loved him. The stone didn't care. The marble didn't care. Only the woman had cared. And he had evicted her. The bankruptcy hearing was a spectacle. Because Richard was a public figure in the local business community, the courtroom was full. Creditors, former employees, and curious onlookers packed the benches. Richard sat alone at the defendant's table. His new lawyer, the public defender Catherine had recommended, was a young, earnest man named David who looked like he was 12 years old. "Your Honor," David said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Dalton is requesting a Chapter 7 liquidation." He has zero assets. His liabilities exceed $14 million. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, looked over her spectacles at Richard. Mr. Dalton, according to the filing, you were the CEO of a major infrastructure firm just last month. How does a man lose $14 million in 30 days? Richard stood up. He wore an off-the-rack suit from Macy's. It was a size too big. Hubris, Your Honor, Richard said quietly. I leveraged everything I had on assets I didn't own. The gavel banged. The liquidation was approved. Richard walked out of the courthouse a free man, technically. But he was a financial ghost. His credit score was 400. His bank accounts were closed. His reputation was incinerated. He walked to the bus stop. He didn't have a car anymore. He sat on the bench, watching the luxury cars drive by. He saw a Mercedes with the license plate DLTN1. It was his old car. It was being driven by a stranger. He checked his pocket. He had the check Catherine had given him. $50,000. It was all he had in the world. He could use it to start over. He could move to a new city, maybe Phoenix or Las Vegas, and try to get a job as a foreman. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. It was run down, with peeling paint and weeds in the yard. He rented a studio apartment for $1,200 a month. He needed to stay in Santa Barbara. He needed to see what happened next. 6 months passed. Richard got a job. Not in construction management. No one would hire him. He got a job at a hardware store, mixing paint and cutting keys. Hey Rick, customer needs a match on this eggshell white. His manager, a 20-year-old kid named Kyle, yelled across the store. On it, Richard said. He took the paint chip. He mixed the pigment. He shook the can. He was good at it. He was efficient. He was humble. One afternoon, a woman walked into the store. She was wearing sunglasses and a scarf. She walked up to the counter. I need 20 gallons of exterior primer, she said. Richard looked up. It was Jessica. She froze when she saw him in the orange apron. She lowered her sunglasses. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in disgust. Richard, she sneered. This is where you landed. Mixing paint. Hello, Jessica, Richard said, his voice steady. Exterior primer. Is this for a new project? I'm redecorating a condo in the marina, she said haughtily. My new fiancé's place. He's a surgeon. That's nice, Richard said. He punched the order into the computer. That'll be $400. She threw a credit card on the counter. You look terrible, Richard. Old, I feel old, he admitted. But I sleep better. Why? Because you have nothing to lose. Because I have nothing to hide, he corrected. She signed the receipt and grabbed her receipt. You were a disappointment, Rick. A total waste of time. I know, he said. Be careful with the surgeon, Jessica. Make sure you check the deed before you renovate the kitchen. She glared at him and stormed out. Richard watched her go. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel anything for her. She was just a symptom of the disease he had cured himself of. He went back to mixing paint. That evening, he turned on the local news in his small apartment. The lead story caught his eye. The historic Oakmont estate, formerly the home of developer Richard Dalton, reopened today as the Sullivan Pembroke Center for Women. The estate, valued at $20 million, was donated by Catherine Pembroke to serve as a transitional housing and legal aid center for women displaced by domestic and financial abuse. The camera panned over the house. The meditation pavilion Jessica had built was gone, replaced by a playground. The master study, his sanctuary of power, was shown filled with desks where lawyers were giving free advice to women. And there was Catherine. She was cutting a ribbon. She looked radiant. She was interviewed by the reporter. Ms. Pembroke, why turn such a valuable property into a shelter? Catherine smiled at the camera. Because a house is just a structure. It only becomes a home when it protects the people inside it. I wanted to build a foundation that couldn't be taken away. Richard turned off the TV. He sat in the dark. He wept. Not for the house, but for the realization of what a magnificent woman he had been married to and how blind he had been. 2 years later. The California sun was hot, but the breeze off the ocean made it bearable. Richard was kneeling in the dirt, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was 55 now. His hair was completely gray. His hands were rough, calloused, and permanently stained with soil. He was working as the head groundskeeper for the Santa Barbara Botanical Gardens. It wasn't a glamorous job, but he loved it. He loved the quiet. He loved making things grow. He understood the soil now. He respected it. He was pruning a row of rare heritage roses when a shadow fell over him. You're pruning them too short, Mr. Dalton. Richard froze. He knew that voice. He stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. He took off his hat. Catherine was standing on the path. She was wearing a simple linen dress and holding a sun hat. She looked older, lines around her eyes, but she was beautiful. Catherine, he said. He didn't know what else to say. I heard you were working here, she said. The director told me they had a new groundskeeper who was working miracles with the native plant section. I just listen to what the ground wants, Richard said. It usually tells you if you listen. You never used to listen, she said softly. I know. I was too busy talking. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them heavy with 20 years of history and 2 years of silence. I saw what you did with the house, Richard said. The center. It's amazing, Kate. You did something good. We help a lot of people, she nodded. It's busy. Exhausting. But it's real, she looked at his hands. Rough. God. Are you happy, Richard? He thought about it. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He made $25 an hour. I'm peaceful, he said. I don't look over my shoulder anymore. I don't check the stock market every 10 minutes. I work. I sleep. I read. That sounds nice, she said. It is, he hesitated. Catherine, I want you to know. I never contested the annulment. I never fought for the money. I deserved it. All of it. I know you didn't fight, she said. That's why I'm here. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. The trust had a meeting last week. Since the company, Dalton Infrastructure, was dissolved and the assets liquidated, there was a surplus after the creditors were paid. A small one. About $100,000. She held the envelope out to him. Legally, the trust could keep it. But you built the company, Richard. Before you lost your way, you were a good builder. You worked hard. This belongs to you. Richard looked at the envelope. $100,000. It was a fortune to him now. It could buy him a small house, a new truck. He reached out and took the envelope. He felt the weight of it. Then he handed it back. No, Richard said. Catherine looked surprised. Richard, take it. It's yours, it's not mine, he said firmly. I don't want money from that life. That life is dead. Put it into the center. Build a new wing. Fix the roof. Help someone who needs it. Catherine stared at him. Her eyes began to shine with tears. She saw him then, really saw him, for the first time in years. The arrogance was gone. The vanity was gone. The man standing before her was just a man. You've changed, she whispered. I had to break to be fixed, he said. He smiled, a genuine, sad smile. You taught me that. You have to till the soil before you can plant something new. Catherine put the envelope back in her purse. She stepped forward, and for a brief, electric moment, she placed her hand on his forearm. I'm proud of you, Richard, she said. She turned and walked away down the garden path, the sunlight catching her hair. Richard watched her go until she disappeared around the bend. He felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. He put his hat back on, knelt down in the dirt, and went back to tending the roses. He didn't own the land. He didn't own the flowers. But for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. Richard Dalton spent 20 years building a fortune on a foundation of ego, never realizing that the true power lay in the hands of the woman he underestimated. He thought he could evict his wife, but instead, he evicted himself from a life of illusion. In the end, Richard lost the mansion, the millions, and the mistress, but he gained something far more valuable, his soul. Catherine proved that true ownership isn't about whose name is on the deed, but whose values hold the ground. If you enjoyed this story of karma, justice, and redemption, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments, do you think Richard deserved a second chance, or did he get off too easy? Thanks for watching.